So let's talk a little bit about sand and water, and this is really thinking about the physics of the ridge. So usually when you see a watershed map, you know, people always draw the rainfalls in the mountains, it goes down the rivers, it goes into the estuaries out to the sea, it evaporates back, and this whole cycle starts again. Well, the ridge is a little bit different from that. So we have lots of evaporation, that's water coming off plants. Evaporation, water coming off open water surfaces like a seasonal wetland or a lake. We have water coming out of the transpiration of plants when plants give off water as they open their little stigmata and their leaves. We also have lots of water coming from adjacent wetlands off the ridge. You know, the ridge acts as a sort of system where wet, moist air rises over the ridge, and lots of precipitation as a result of that. So that's the water cycle here on the ridge. What happens when that precipitation falls on the ridge? Well, some of it, particularly if the sand is very wet, will run off into little seasonal wetlands. A lot of it infiltrates down through the sand. So you can think of us as the biggest sandy water tank in the region. Think of the Lake Wales Ridge as a giant kids' sandbox that's often full of water. So we serve, and of course when you fill up a big sand tank like that, it releases water slowly. It takes a long time to fill up, Water goes down, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and water also goes out sideways. So when rain falls on the Lake Wales Ridge, we get a lot of infiltration into the sand. And that can go either into the first aquifer system we have, which is called the Surficial Aquifer, the one right below your feet. In some parts of the ridge it might be just 2 or 3 feet below you. In other parts of the ridge it might be 80 or 90 feet down before it hits water. On Archbold, around the station, if those of you are familiar, the Surficial Aquifer, which is sort of shown by this line here, is only maybe, where the station is, maybe 6-10 feet down depending on the time of year. If we go to our high point on the station, which is the Red Hill, it's 80 to 90 feet down. So it depends a bit where you are on the ridge as to how far down it is on the Surficial Aquifer. So rain falls, seeps through here, and may often seep sideways into seasonal wetlands. So all those little seasonal wetlands we have, yes, of course, they're charged by rain coming on into the wetland, but there's also a lot of seepage from the surrounding sands into these low points. And by low points, I'm often meaning 1 to 2 feet lower than where you're standing in the ridge system. So there's a lot of seepage this way. After it's been dry for a while, what happens to those little seasonal wetlands is the water then leaves them and seeps out back into the sand and down. So they're sort of like little saucers filling up, releasing the water, filling up, releasing the water. Some water actually infiltrates through our Surficial Aquifer and keeps going down, and may, there are a series of breaks in what this sort of clay layer called the confining layer, and may go down into the intermediate aquifer. And I'm going to talk about the Floridan Aquifer next. But I want you to think of a system where there's this big sandbox, there's a lot of seepage and movement down on the sandbox, and the other thing that happens is water seeps off the side of the ridge, and we'll come to that in a little bit. But when you think about water moving on the ridge, think about moving down, moving laterally, and then eventually often seeping off the side of the ridge, on the east side or the west side. So when you come off the ridge, when you drive over 70 or 60 and you feel yourself diving off the ridge, when you get to the bottom of that, the toe of the ridge is a very wet place. That's where all the bay heads are. That's where all the sort of deeper, peatier soils are. So the ridge releases water sideways and it seeps out as well as releasing water down. If you had been here 100 years ago, you would have found deep bay heads all the way up and down the east and the west side of the ridge. Many of them have been cleared, but the ridge used to be bordered by very deep peat bay heads. These are wetlands that are dominated by bay trees. So that was the edge of both ridges at the bottom of the ridge.